Hi, this is IBM Museum, back with another video on the IBM Personal System 2 System Information Tool. This time from a 55SX, which is sitting on top of the Model 30 that I did demoed the SIT on the prior video. These cases look very alike. But in this case, the PS2 Model 55SX being above a Model 50 is a microchannel system. And this is going to be where SIT is going to shine in this case. I'm using a different video capture method tonight. Don't even have my display connected, going right to the system that's in front of me. I've stretched out my keyboard and mouse cord so I can get at them. And we're going to see even how a mouse runs under the System Information Tool as well. So let's get going. So we have the Model 55SX all booted up. As you can see on the screen, we have a mouse driver loaded as part of the boot process. So let's go ahead and start up SIT from the hard drive. And I had to transfer over SIT via floppy from the Model 30 to this particular 55SX. It didn't have the that utility on it prior to this. So with this new video capture method, I don't have as much screen real estate to the right-hand side. That's not a problem in this instance, except for the help areas. And that's the same as we saw last night. So I'm not going to go through those particular areas again. I'll be a little bit more brief as I step through these different screens as well. Same home screen that we're looking at. In this case, as I mentioned, we have a block cursor for the mouse and even gives a little bit of functionality to with that close box or clicking on a particular area of doing something, even to do things like toggle the sound or step through the program a little bit better here. For this primary window, I would have to see sometime on what close window does, because that would effectively exit the program as well. But we're going to use the mouse a little bit to go through these screens. I'll probably fall back to the keyboard and using the cursor keys as well. But I wanted to show what having a mouse driver in DOS loaded before you run SIT does in this instance. So we're going to go ahead and double click on this adapter information. And as I said, this is where the SIT utility is going to give a lot more information, being that it's a microchannel system that we're running it on now. And it's showing for slot 1, which is on the 55SX, is the lowest slot, where we had, to have that real-time clock module that we modified low enough profile so that bottom adapter can slip in that slot. And on the 55SX, it is it's with the auxiliary video extension, or AVE, considered a 8514/A slot for that adapter type, although the 55SX, as previously mentioned, did have some issues with that that display adapter in some instances, the older versions of the 55SX. So the details of these two lower slots are no adapter present. We get to slot 3, and it shows the memory expansion adapter I have in here. And I'm going to have to check further on how much text it has integrated into the SIT utility to be able to identify adapters like this, or to spell out the adapter names. Probably the IBM adapters are covered pretty well, but there may be some obscure microchannel adapters that you could have in there that may not. It'll give you the adapter ID or POS ID for that adapter, but it probably wouldn't have any text to explain what it is. And we go in further, details on adapter. Now that we're actually able on a microchannel system to check over those adapters, the ID of F7, memory expansion adapter 2, IBM 8286 enabled. Okay, so the adapter is enabled, and then there's POS data that's of how that card is configured, and a subaddress value. Okay, since that's the last adapter, let's go on to the disk information. Takes a little bit of time. Hard disk by 11. Okay. So, and this is actually where I have that PIRA Procom replacement riser in there, so I can actually run a small IDE drive instead of the proprietary drives, what they called the DBA or direct bus attachment ESDI drives that came with the 55SX and a lot of the other microchannel systems when they first came out in 1987. And tells the available space, other information there of the physical geometry of the drive and the volume label. And I don't know if that's a volume label for me or the DOS installation process or anything like that. Okay, hard disk by device number. And this is some spurious entries here after the first drive listing. And that may just be that Procom PIRA BIOS or something else that's going through there and confusing. I'm sure that if we had the DBA ESDI drive in there, it would be able to identify some details. And that's even on a later video, either on a 55SX or another system that has that. Maybe I can run this on a MUL 70 next and kind of have a DBA ESDI drive in there and kind of see what it does. So these kind of appear to be duplicates of that primary entry that I've repeated 5 times in this case. And owned by physical drive letter C. And the Procom PIRA package was actually a combination of that replacement riser for the 55SX and a paired small capacity IDE drive. And in my case, I have the what's called the PIRA 120 for 120 megabytes of size. Okay, partition table. And then we have these other unallocated partition, and I don't know what those ghost areas are. Probably likely spurious entries. Huh. And I had tried this on the system just to see if it recognizes the drive by multiple aliases in this case. The CD, E, F, and G. So maybe when we get back to DOS, we'll look at those and see if we can access a drive by the alias. The diskette drives, being I just have the drive A on there, and it's the 1.44 megabyte, 3.5 inch diskette drive. Okay. Keyboard information. And if you remember on the MUL 30, this told us that just that one line of the 101/102 keyboard supported. In this case, with the MUL 55SX, we have the get typomatic rate supported, set typomatic rate supported, return to default typomatic rate supported. So just varying on how you have your keyboard set up for speed, if you're a fast typist or a slow typist that doesn't need that adjustment. That typomatic rate that can be set on the system. Memory information, memory hardware, and it's not able to give further detail on even the memory modules in the 55SX. Okay, it gives us some information on memory in this case. I thought there was the ability to scroll there, but I don't see any. And then memory mapping. And here we do have the information, the ability to scroll. Clicking on that little arrow. I don't know if it, within that gap between the arrows, it doesn't seem to do anything for the mouse. But it just shows how the memory is allocated in this case. The BIOS areas in this case. System RAM, 640 KB of that continuous space, what's considered standard memory. And video RAM. Okay. Okay, miscellaneous technical information. Okay. Second interrupt chip is present. Real-time clock is present. Wait on an external event is unsupported. Extended BIOS data area is allocated. System has a microchannel bus. DMA supports 24-bit address space. Keyboard functionality call supported. Return POS data call supported. Return memory map call is unsupported. Enable disable processor functions call unsupported. And we might see that change when we run it on the MUL 70 that I have, and that's called an AXX submodel. It's a 25 megahertz 386DX, and it's on its own little CPU daughter card, and it actually has cache. And on those cache-based systems, that's where IBM started going through and giving the ability to turn off cache or turn it on, basic functionality there, maybe to clear it or other things. Okay, and 8042 keyboard controller in system. Data streaming is unsupported. We'll see that later with Hiren. Microchannel PS2s, of course, like I said. SCSI subsystem not present on the system board. We kind of knew that. Information panel is not installed. We knew that. This is not an IML system. SCSI support is not in the IML image. mouse information. Okay, mouse is present, PS2 type, driver version 8.32. I think that's a Microsoft mouse driver. And IRQ number, I can't figure that out when I went through and prepped for this video of the value of 255 being the IRQ number. I don't think that would be possible in this case. And that it may just mean that it's the PS2 mouse. It's got some pretty integrated functions on the planars of PS2s, and they handle it a little bit differently, and that's what that may be detecting there. Operating system information, and it's DOS version 6.22, MS-DOS. And model and processor information, another area that we're going to get quite a bit more information from a microchannel system. And the machine name, it properly identifies the model in this instance. The processor, 80486, and it's actually a Cyrix clock doubler CPU that's on the system planar in this case, and that looks like it was put on by IBM. And I'm now actually running all the software for the Cyrix processor. Hat tip to Tim Clark. And the speed in megahertz, I think it's just blindly determining that number. It's not actually measuring it. And that CPU runs at 32 megahertz internally and 16 megahertz externally. I do have an FPU, or floating point unit, coprocessor on this. It's a standard 387 SX, I think. I don't even think it's the low power version, 387 SL. And that's the 387 SX is the earlier floating point unit core. Later on in the 386 level floating point units, Intel went through there and redesigned the core and made a later version a little bit faster. And the software can generally detect and figure that out. In this case, just because it's seen a coprocessor and identifies that the system CPU as an 8486, it's thinking that it's a 46DX processor. So the model F8, and as I said, we're going to see that with anything 386SX, 386DX, or above. IBM generically identified them as the F8 BIOS model. And the submodel, this actually is showing IBM wanted to identify the difference between the Type 2 and Type 1 Model 55SX planars. And this has a Type 2 planar, but it reports that submodel code as 0C just because they didn't get the correct ROM chip in this case, or just a little bit of oversight. And it's the same BIOS. They just had those Type 2s and Type 1s identify themselves differently under the two unique BIOS versions for the system. And the BIOS revision is 00, meaning the first, and in this case only, BIOS for the 55SX. There was only one BIOS revision that was initially released with the systems and never updated later on. And the BIOS ROM date of the 2nd of November of 1988. And here we have what's called the Planar ID, or it's a positive for the planar of FBFF. And with the microchannel systems, those planar IDs, there's a routine that you can go through and to have the planar report an ID, so software even knows, the code that you write even knows what sort of planar it's running on in this case for the PS2s, and rather unique. And that was when this initially showed up. It was with the PS2 series. Parallel and serial port information, as we saw yesterday with the Model 30, it doesn't really provide any more information than one parallel port, one serial port, and doesn't really give any detail of the functionality of those. On the 55SX being its microchannel, they have the UART chip for the serial controller has what they call a FIVO buffer, 16-byte first in, first out buffer that helps with communications over the earlier UART chips. And SCSI information, at least in this one, is not going to lock up the system like it does my Model 30. And it doesn't have any IBM SCSI adapters in here. And so it tells us that it's not supported on this machine. And it might be kind of handy to see what this SCSI information provides on a microchannel system with those IBM SCSI boards in place. Can give some further detail, maybe that the SCSI level and the later utilities and drivers that Unil on the comp.sys.ibm.ps2.hardware group updated. He figured out how that communicates with the SCSI subsystem, and wrote better drivers than IBM had. And then lastly, the video information. And just about the same detail, because it's equivalent to what adapter I have on the Model 30 in the prior video. So that's a quick run through on the system information tool on the 55SX. Let's go through and just to see. Okay, so even though the information in SIT was telling us that, we're not able to access a drive by any of those aliases in this case. So if you like this video, please click on that like button. There'll be much more content like this. I'll get to running the system information tool on other systems, other microchannel systems, to see what results it gives on those systems, just as a and I don't know how IBM released this diskette. As I say, I seem to be the only one that's ever encountered it. I've not heard anybody else talk about it. I don't even know where I got mine, what it came with, or anything like that. I just don't know how IBM distributed those, or who that target audience was for that diskette. So that's all I have for this video. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.